Coming back to Pembrokeshire, light weather changes in an instant in Pembrokeshire. And Pembrokeshire is renowned for it.
Yes.
Really. So you must be a weather forecast viewer, and a assiduous one.
My iPad has so many weather forecasts on it. And I've just found one recently that's an amateur one. And people that, you can buy in gadget shops, you can buy little mini weather stations.
Yeah.
And they can connect to the internet. And they can all be put on this one site. So there are people in Pembrokeshire who just have got them in their home. There's a guy in St David's, and I can look at his weather station. It doesn't give me predictions, but but the wonderful thing is it gives me the past. Most weather stations never give you the past. It only tells you what's going to happen over the next week or two. Yeah. But I can look back and I can say, this period it was like this, and over these years. And so, now I'm a weather fanatic.
Shoot me down in flames, but you make a living from photography.
Yeah,
so you have to create images that people wish to buy as well.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, I'm a black and white photographer. In Pembrokeshire, everybody sees me as a colour photographer because the Quiet Storm project is the one the galleries want. It's the one, people buy photographs. I mean, I'm lucky I do have a lot of collectors who collect my work, but the majority of people who don't know me buy because they love that beach, they love that spot, and that's great. I mean, don't get me wrong, but then it pigeonholes you as a colour photographer, and I'm not. But I'm not either. It's a difficult one. Photography can do everything and anything. It's the wonderful thing about it. But you have to start somewhere. So I always start with black and white. And I say to myself, does this project need anything beyond black and white? Does it need colour? Well, of course, the Quiet Storm needed colour. If you're going to show green light coming through the clouds, you need it. So yes, I use colour. But I wouldn't stop there. The other thing photography does amazingly well, and it was one of the biggest things there was in photography, as big as television is now, was 3D. Photography during the Victorian era, 3D photography was humongous.
It was,
so photography can do 3D. So I'm not against saying, does this project really need 3D? The other thing photography does unbelievably well is it can create the illusion of movement. One still after another, but it's still photography. And the movement is only an illusion. So I'm not against using movement, but it has to have a reason. So I always start with black and white. That's my base. And I've never really had the urge to show people that the grass is green and the sky's blue. It's a given. What I want to tell people is about events, about a sense of place, about the things that happen in that place.
So why do you think that black and white has this resonance with us, and it still has a resonance in this digital age that we're living in? People will enthuse over black and white
because
photography.
It's a photograph, and it's definitely a photograph.
Do you think it has an impact in our heads?
Yes. I mean, you've probably had it, I have it all the time. When people walk into a gallery or an exhibition or a show, or when I'm doing a talk, I have the one thing I've never ever had happen to me with a black and white photograph, but I have happen all the time with colour, is somebody will walk up to it and they say, did it really look like that? Why don't they do that with black and white, but they do it with colour? And I go, no, it didn't really look like that. It's a photograph. It's ink on paper. And, it wasn't frozen in time. The world wasn't two-dimensionalised. It wasn't cropped. And why do people not think about all those aspects, but when it comes to the quality of the colour, they want it to be as it was real, but they don't mind the fact that it's two-dimensional or cropped or all these other things. So that's why I love photography, black and white photographs, is that people see black and white photographs as photographs, not as a window on the world, not as something else, not as some sort of reality. It's a photograph. And it's the abstraction. I mean, that's why I love photography. Photographs abstract the world.
Yes.
And it's that abstraction that I love. I love the fact that a house on a hill, comes right up against the sign next to me. And by me moving those two things around in the focal plane, I can make them relate and I can make them feed off each other, which doesn't happen in reality. The house is miles away on the hill, but it's not in a photograph. And it's that abstraction. That's the first thing. I abstract the world, and I use those abstractions in the way writers use words.
Yes.
And the exciting thing is how you put them all together.
Yes.
And that's what excites me.
And you like creating novels.
Yes, and that's it. Then when you've done that, that's a starting point. It's like the writer writing the sentence. But then you don't want to just write a sentence. No. You want to write a load of sentences, and you want them all to work together. Yeah. And for me, the only exciting thing, and the reason I take photographs, is when all those photographs come together. I don't like it when my photographs go out individually. Now, don't tell anybody this, and anybody that's listening to this, don't tell anybody this, because I rely on people buying individual images.
Yeah.
It's always surprised me. A blurb book costs quite a lot of money, and this Darrow book I'm going to do is going to cost at least a couple of hundred. And people go, a couple of £100 for a book, I can't afford that. But they'll come in and they'll spend £300 on a single image. And I say, but there's 500 images in this book, and you don't want to pay £200 for 500 images, but you'll pay 300 or 400 for a single one.
How much time do you spend in post
post-production?
Yeah.
Not as long as I used to in the darkroom.
But then, different kettle of fish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I do exactly the same as I did in the darkroom. I was being a bit facetious there. A photograph, a negative. Somebody, I can't remember the name of the photographer, but somebody said a negative is like a score of music. And it's so true. We used to have to do it when I was training. You take a photograph, you'd hand your negative over to another guy, and he'd print it up, and it would be completely different to what you'd have created. A photograph comes to life in the darkroom. It's just collected information when it's a raw file that's the other thing, isn't it? People always saying, I don't do anything with my raw files. Well, that's exactly as it was. Nonsense.
Yes.
Has anybody ever seen a raw file? Yes. A raw file looks like a grey mush.
Oh, yeah, it's awful.
It's terrible. Yes. If he puts it out like that, nobody would look at it. Yeah. What they do is they rely on the piece of software in the camera usually to adjust it into a photograph. Yeah. So somebody's adjusting it for them if it's not them. So I do the same things in the digital darkroom as I did in the darkroom. And they were hundreds of things we did. I was very lucky. I did a lot of my training under John Blakemore up in Derby. We used to go up to work, summer workshops up there. And you do anything to get the image to work. There wasn't any taboos or things you should and shouldn't do like there are nowadays. Did you know that Bill Brandt used to put his images on the darkroom exposure? He would hold a Tupperware lid under the between the film and the lens to get a diffused light, only for a second or two. Yeah. Well, not even that, but and he would get the look he wanted. There is no reel or anything. So I dodge, I burn, I work like I did with multi-gradient negatives. I will select areas and have the foreground contrastier than the back. I will isolate the black of the image, and I will take the contrast right down to help give that illusion of depth, and I will sharpen through contrast the foreground. How I will I use Lightroom, and that's my preferred piece of software, as they say. And I can do all the things I did in the darkroom, I can do in the computer. It's no different. The one difference, and I think it's the most wonderful difference, is that photography got separated as technology moved on. It got separated from the paper that we printed on. There would be things between the paper and the emulsions until you ended up with plastic papers. And if you go back, you look at platinum prints, the paper you printed on was unbelievably important to the image.
Absolutely.
And now we're the same. We're back to that. We put through the printer, the paper is just so important. Yes. You can't not think about it.
With its own profiles and all
exactly.
sorts. Exactly.
I use an ultra white on some images. So the Quiet Storm project, I use an ultra white photo rag to get as much light punching through the colour as possible, to give that sense of it's to do with light. Whereas I might use a more muted photo rag for the Beating the Bounds project, because that will give me a softer image. I mean, I've never been as far as using, say, Somerset Velvet, which will never, ever, as far as I can tell, give you rich blacks. I always want my rich blacks, because that's one of the ways I edit the world. We were saying in the darkroom, but when I take the photograph, as photographers, we got limited things we can do. We can say this, not that. So we crop the world. Then we can say, I want this in focus, that out of focus. We can say, I want to expose that right and that not. So I can have things overexposed or underexposed. I can do limited things to make the world the way I need it to be able to communicate to people what I'm trying to say. But then you can do that in the darkroom. So if you end up with some detail in an area that you really didn't want detail, you want a solid black. I meet so many people, you mustn't have solid blacks. There must be some detail there. Nonsense. Negative spaces are brilliant. They really help the image. So I will darken it. I really get in there and get rid of all that horrible detail that I never wanted in the first place. To help people, not to make the image better to look at, but to help people see what I was looking at. If you have everything exposed and everything sharp, and how are people going to know what you were meant or thought when you saw the thing?
Yes. Because the things, when we look at things, there's that. I found some photographs that I took when I was 18, and they were fleeting photographs of somebody I loved a lot, actually, and they were poignant in the fact that they were fleeting glances of somebody. And it's that there was no detail as such. They were probably, one would look at them and think they were quite bad photographs in many respects, but they had their impact and their power. It really gets into your soul somehow, doesn't it?
It's so true. What is this preoccupation people have at the moment with detail? We're going back to the Victorian era when the daguerreotype first came out, and people would sit with magnifying glasses looking at every weft in the fabric. And it's so true. People zoom in. I had an argument online a little while ago with this guy who's saying you have to use the latest Photoshop and you have to use the latest cameras. He said, because when you zoom in down to pixel level, I'm saying, excuse me, how do you display your images? And he said, well, I print them. And I said, well, what's pixel level got to do with anything? Printers can't show that much detail. It's all a nonsense. Well, for me, it's all a nonsense. Some people get off on it, but it's amazing how people have got preoccupied with detail. I've got no time for detail. At the moment down on the Darrog, or any of them, I never photograph at 100 ASA. The biggest problem with digital cameras nowadays is they're not SLRs anymore, they're medium format. Yeah. And it's getting to the point where digital cameras are not medium format anymore, they're large format. Yeah. And I don't want to be using a large format camera, I don't want to be using a medium format camera. I want to be using an SLR. I want to get the look I had. The only way I can get the look I had now is to be shooting at 640, 340, depending on the light. This morning, 3200. Right. And I don't want the detail. What's the detail got to do with anything? Does a bird look better because you can see every feather? If the important thing to you is the detail on the bird, well, I don't really understand that.
Well, is the general public being conned then? Are we being conned by all this megapixel nonsense?
Well, we are. It's a selling point, isn't it? It has to be. There has to be something new in photography. If I don't really use Photoshop, but as far as I can tell, Photoshop hasn't done anything for photographers in years. Maybe I don't know what the algorithms and things. The amount of smoothness to the image, but again, unless you're going to print it up God knows how big, that's of unimportant. Especially if you're doing a book.
So is there an element of snob? I kind of feel that sometimes, is that people with cameras and stuff, because I haven't changed my camera in 3-4 years.
There's no need to.
There's no need. I bought a smaller camera because I wanted a smaller camera to work with, because I felt more comfortable.
It's so much better.
Easier, and it felt more comfortable in my hands. And it takes me a long time to learn to use a camera and to feel a camera, if you like, and know what its parameters are and what lenses I like to work with, because I found as I've grown within photography that I like to use maybe 2 lenses, maybe even 1 lens, and I will stick to 1 lens for a long time and know how that lens works and where it's happiest.
Yeah, I'm happy with 1 lens. I mean, people always mean, what do you keep in your camera bag? What camera bag? I mean, why do you need a camera bag? What's you lugging all this stuff about for? You just need a camera and a lens. I mean, what's the point of having 3 or 4 lenses with you? Yeah. Again, we come back to continuity. How can you keep a continuity if you're zooming in and out?
Yeah.
No. It's the 1 camera with 1 lens. It doesn't have to be a good camera. I mean, my son he's really good. He won't be a photographer because I'm a photographer, I expect. But he uses his iPhone. He takes gorgeous images. And it's the bigger I think what it is there's this thing, if the technology's better, that makes me a better photographer. But of course, it's nonsense. Better for, and I suppose the other problem is what we talked about at the beginning. People come up to an image and they look at it as if it's a painting. I mean, I've had people come in here with the one big shot I've got, which is the Quiet Storm 28 megapixel image, and people go up and go, "Wow, amazing detail, amazing quality," and I say, "Well, you're right, but I'm sorry, I can't take any credit for that. That's Nikon and that's Epson." And I love it. I think it's gorgeous quality, but it's not me. I cannot take credit for that. So you can't go around taking credit. And then people then say, well, I'll move back to working with a large format camera because it's harder. Harder? What does it mean harder? It's slower. You've got to learn what you've got to do. But it's not. I worked with medium and large formats for years. When I was doing that, I didn't, it's what you had. You didn't think if it's hard. You had, there was a saying, wasn't there, back then, when they say, it takes you a lifetime to learn to take a photograph. It takes you an afternoon to learn to use a camera. So it took you an afternoon to learn to use a medium format camera or a large camera. No, it wasn't harder. It seemed to be important. Yeah. But I cannot understand why people want to be using large format cameras when there are digital cameras that will give you the same quality. And when they say, oh no, it doesn't give you the same quality, well, in my experience it does. I've been to exhibitions where they've had people like Ansel Adams images against modern SLR images. The SLR images outstripped Ansel Adams unbelievably. They were sharper, crisper, more tonal range, everything. It's wishful thinking. Yeah. If I can have a harder way of doing it, that makes it more important. Being harder to do something doesn't make it more important. No, I can't be doing with that at all. It's like we have the alchemy. I have the alchemy. There's an alchemy. There's that. People think that because there's an alchemy involved with film, that it makes it exclusive. There's an exclusivity thing. But what do they mean by alchemy?
I don't know, Chris, because
it's a technology.
Yeah.
It's a technology no different to digital. Yeah. It's man-made. Yeah. It was the best we could do at the time. Yeah. It hasn't got any magic powers or any. You can't see things. It's all a nonsense. And also, digital, like in music and like in this, digital sound can emulate virtually any type of sound that's ever been. Amplifiers of any sort. And I know people will say, oh, no, it can't. But as far as I can tell from people I've talked to, yes, it can. And the same with digital. Digital photography can emulate any photography that's ever been. And I cannot really see the point of going back to using tinplate or... don't get me wrong, I've tried, I've done gum arabic, and I've done, I've done platinum prints and things like that. And it was fun and it was exciting, but it didn't make my photographs any better. It didn't make what I was saying any better. The only reason I can see people doing it is if they want to take the importance that they feel is there in film and apply it to themselves. I'm better than you because I use film. And no, it's a nonsense. Cartier-Bresson did not use his granddad's camera, and his photographs weren't any worse for it. Photography is a technology. It moves forward all the time, and it'll move forward when I'm dead. And whatever they're doing in the future, they should be doing it. They shouldn't all think back and think, "Oh, we must go back to digital." I think what's happened is they've lost the reason for taking photographs. It's like saying it's like somebody going up to a writer, and this writer's saying, "I'm a proper writer because I use a quill, and my writing is so much better because I use a quill." It's rubbish.
Yeah. I use an Olivetti typewriter rather than a word processor on a computer.
I don't think they should stop doing it. If they enjoy it and they love it, do it. But don't think that because you're doing it, your work is some way better than somebody that isn't using it. It doesn't make any sense. It's like in the past, I work in 810 plate, therefore I'm better than you because you use a SLR. It's forgetting the reason for a photograph. A photograph is communication. It's telling you something. My favourite photographs are in my old editions that I've bought over the years of Picture Post.
Yeah. And
the sugar paper that they're printed on, the rubbishy paper they're printed on, it's terrible. But then the photographers knew that was going to happen.
Exactly so. They took perfect photographs.
Just go on that medium.
Yes.
Exactly. So Bill Brandt used that blocked, strong shapes because he knew that's the way they were going to be seen.
Absolutely.
And it didn't make his work any less important. His work didn't get suddenly more important when it was printed finely up in the gallery to when it came out in the Picture Post. If anything, it was more important in the Picture Post. Definitely.
It was reaching a far bigger audience.
Yeah. And it's like most people see photographs on the internet now. There's nothing wrong with that. My photographs don't become more important once I print them on paper to when they, on Twitter. It's so nonsensical. I really cannot understand where people are coming from. It's like saying, if I could find a calligrapher to write out my poems would be so much better.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Earlier in our chat, you were talking about the influence that your tutors had on you when you were in college, university. Why were they so important? What made them special? What made them switch things on in your head?
It was funny when I went to decided I had a friend who was a writer, and he said you need to go and learn to be a photographer, because I'd been taking photographs, been working for magazines and things. But he said, basically, you need to learn. He said, why do you think you can't learn? He said, I had to learn to be a writer. How dare you not learn to be a photographer? And at that time, I was reading a lot. And I was reading a lot of Northern European philosophy of photography. But I was also reading people like Berger. And I was reading anything I could get my hands on, really. But it was all to do with the why behind photography. And then... So I started looking around for somewhere to go, and I looked at Napier, and I looked at Newport, and I looked at Nottingham. And all three appealed to me. But the thing that appealed to me most was when I had my interview at Nottingham, Ewan Duff was talking straight out of my head. I mean, it was as if I was talking, as if I'd already been through the course, and I suddenly knew what I was talking about. I thought, oh, God, I want to be like this. And the course wasn't about taking good images. It wasn't about darkroom technique or any of these things. In fact, I would say its one failing was it was completely and utterly not about that room technique. That's why I had to go off and do summer courses and things. But what they were about was, how do you make photographs talk? How do you get across, meaningful things with a photograph? And I mean, it just inspired me. The other tutor there was Dr. Phil Stokes, who's sadly dead now, but his ideas behind photography inspired me. I wanted to have a reason for taking photographs. Just producing pretty images, which, is easy. I mean, I know a lot of people say, no, it's not easy, but that's not true. Basically, a camera is automatic. And there are certain things you can learn, templates you can use, stand in the footsteps of other photographers. You can produce pretty pictures easily. Photography should have got to a point where those things are taken for a given now. I dislike it when people come and say, I love your compositions. Well, I'm a photographer. They should be good. And this is what I trained in doing. You don't go up to a writer and say, wow, you can spell. You just don't do it. Why do people do it with photographers? They should be talking about what you're saying. And they should say, I don't agree with what you're saying. Or they should say, yes, I agree with what you're saying. Or, I want to read more. Or visually read more. But not the basics. Not, this is a lovely image. This is well composed. Or whatever. I mean,
it sounds like a trite question to ask you, really, but education and photography courses are becoming.
I think maybe it's my age, but I had a young girl come to me this winter, and I won't say the name of the course she was on, but she was on a course, and she said, I came and saw your work in the summer, and she said, you really inspired me and fired me up. And I thought, wow, that's what I want to do. Lovely. And she said, but oh God, I hate it here. She said, I came in with these, people in my head that I wanted to bounce my work off, and photographers that I love, I wanted to bounce my work off. And I put my work, in front of the course, and they said, oh, no. We don't use these people. And then they gave her a list of 4 or 5 photographers. And they said, these are the photographers we want you to bounce your work off. And this is how we work. And this is what you do. And she said, I feel so constricted. And I hear this all the time. Just think about it. When I did my degree, how many places were there in Britain you could do a photographic degree? Hardly any.
Yeah.
There were 25, maybe 30 people on the course when we started, maybe 21 by the time it was the end of the year. And there were 3 courses at once. So what's that? Say around 90 people coming out of maybe 5 or 6 places in Britain. That's a minute amount, isn't it, of people? Now, I cannot think of a town in Britain that doesn't have a photographic degree. And what are there, 95 people on every course?
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous. No more work than there ever was. And also, on top of that, as far as I can tell, they haven't got any more tutors than they ever had. So how can they teach them? No, I think there needs to be a big shake-up in photographic education. The sort of course I was on, it was probably the last year where that, because Ewan left and things changed, and it became more and more about bums on seats and the amount of money a course could bring in to the university, or Poly as it was when I was there. And it all seems to be. I do feel photography, not all across the board, because I see some amazing stuff out there, but so much of it has lost its way. It's as if a lot of photographers have said, especially in academia, well, I think one of the problems that academia had was suddenly amateurs could do photography. I mean, just imagine, when I started as a photographer, how hard was it to see amateur photography? Bloomin' hard. You'd have to go maybe hunt out some library to go to a show, and that was it. Now, what do you see when you hit the button on the computer? nothing but amateur photography. I know people call themselves pro-ams, but they work very, very tightly within the amateur camera club genre. And it's everywhere, and it's the dominant, it's the biggest money in photography. You know, cameras are aimed at amateurs, photographic books are by amateurs, for amateurs, either, you know, oh, I wish I could do that and be like that, or how to do that. I mean, I've read somewhere a while ago that a lot of photo books that are by amateurs, you know, sell quite a lot. Whereas a book by a great photographer, you know, somebody I would say is an amazing photographer that nobody knows about because people don't know about, you know, if you say names, when you say Kudelka or Martin Parr, and they say who, you know, are lucky to sell half as many. So things have changed. Yes, it's really funny. I was saying to somebody the other day, you know, I was saying, there's no such thing as famous photographers. They don't exist. I mean, there are, within the photographic world, there are photographers that are important, and we know about them. But you ask the general public, you know, they aren't famous. They're not household names, unless they're dead. But you know, you say a name like Nick Waplington. Well, Nick Waplington must be one of the top photographers in the country now, and I'm saying this, I'm not over keen on his work, but it doesn't matter. He's a top photographer. He's going to be the only photographer who's ever had, as far as I know, a solo exhibition in the Tate. Now, he should be a household name, but nobody knows about him except outside the you know, the tiny area. So no, it's a weird thing the way photography's gone. Photography is not about photography anymore. It's as if the academic photographer said, okay, well, anybody can do photographs. We got to be different. How can we be different from amateurs? Amateurs have seen that we work in bodies of work. They've seen that we can, you know, they copy, you know, amateurs copy. And they say, we've seen somebody photograph a water tower again and again and again. I'll do that. We've seen somebody's like John Blakemore or the guy that did the water towers. You know, will use the multiple shaky shot, and then that's a good gadget. That looks lovely. It's like blurred water. It's beautiful. We'll do that and call it important, but with no understanding, no reason for doing it other than that it's pretty and it's easy. Like the blurred water thing.
Yeah. Do you think, though, just to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, do you think that the social media that we that we are all part of and we use, Twitter and Facebook and Google Plus and all these other various things that are on the web, that they are actually driving this photography in this particular way, and it's the beautiful shot, it's the milky water,
yes, and the fact that on the websites there's no area for critical analysis. You can or to say no, I don't like this. You can't. You can only say I like this. There's a button like, yes, and that's it. Yeah. You can't.
Or awesome shot.
Yes, you can't be critical anymore, and the longer that goes on, the harder it will be to be critical, right, and not be seen as somebody just with sour grapes. Yeah.
Do you draw criticism from contemporaries, friends, etc.? Do you show work to them? Or
yes. I mean, that's one of the reasons I got this little gallery here, is I can watch people's reactions. I can see, I will put images out that I love, and I will watch people not get it. And like I say, it's not their fault, it's my fault. So I have to then think, okay, well, I am pleased with that, and I do like what I've done, but it's not working. You know, I hate this thing about, well, if they don't understand, it's their problem. Well, no, it's my problem. And if I'm going to communicate, and that's what, for me, photography is about. It's not a graphic thing. It's not about looking pretty. It isn't calligraphy. It's about communicating. And if my communicating isn't working, then I've got to rethink it.
So do you think that, I mean, you have very definite ideas about the world of photography and fascinating stuff, most of which I agree with. would you consider a mentoring situation where you're talking to your young photographer, or that you found a young photographer that has actually got an eye or got a talent for photography? Would you contemplate?
I think if it was just photography per se, as in taking photographs, I think I'd struggle. If it was somebody who suddenly said, like I did when I went to Nottingham, wow, you're using images together, help me, I really want to do this. Yeah, I'd be more than interested to help people, because that's what I'm interested in. I mean, I do workshops where I take people out and I help them produce how to make single images, but that's like teaching somebody to write a sentence, to write. Yeah. It's a starting point, that's great, you all have to do it. But it's not the thing I'm excited about. The thing I'm excited about is how then, when we've written these sentences or these words, or found these words, how we can then make these words speak. And if there was somebody who wanted to work, it needs to happen, because, I'm getting on. I mean, God knows how many years I've got of being able to do this. I started far too late. Wouldn't it be great to have somebody who's young now who says, okay, well, I want to use lots of images to tell stories
and have that commitment.
Yes, and then me pass on what I've learned, and then they take that and they take it beyond anything I've ever thought of, and that's what should happen. I don't want people to just go out and do what I've done. I want them to say, oh, that was a good, like I did with Ewan and everybody. I said that was a great starting point. When I look at John Berger's photo essays, the one he did about the Forest of Dean Doctor. And the one he did about Another Way of Telling, I think it is, where he did the one about the old lady and the person on the peasant farms. I thought, yes, this is really effective, using photographs like memories, bouncing off each other like memories work. But then I suddenly thought, but the limitation is he's having to draw on random old photographs to tell this story. So they're not really connected images. They weren't taken to be together. Yeah. So I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to actually take, but then if you're going to take things to be together, that takes time. So that's an aspect of it. You've got to put up with that. So yes, finding somebody who wants to learn the basics with a minimum amount of stuff I've managed to glean, and then take it and run with it. That would be exciting, really exciting.
I guess I have to ask you, I kind of talking to you that you are in search of something all the time. Are you finding?
I want to find a photographic language. I mean, that's that's my passion. Right. Photography should be more than individual images. A photograph on its own, it to me, it's a lost thing. It's just, yes, it's nice. And I have photographs that I love looking at, by photographers who I love. And I was just going through some Raymond Moore stuff the other day. Some of his photographs, they just are amazing. Or Faye Godwin, or whoever. But I can't be doing with just that. I believe photography needs to be far more than that. I believe photography, if it doesn't, I think it's going to die.
Did moving to Pembrokeshire actually open the door for you? Did it make a difference to you? I mean, I know you say that landscape isn't what it's about. But did actually the move from wherever you were to here make a difference?
I would love to say it did, but it didn't. Right. When I first moved down here, I couldn't take photographs. I didn't take photographs for 8-9 years after moving here because I didn't know the place. Okay. How the hell do you photograph someone you don't know?
Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, I did lots of things, and I was still working a bit commercially then, so I was popping in and out doing stuff. But no, I didn't take any photographs.
It's really funny because I took because I was brought up in North Pembrokeshire near Pwllderry, and I used to go out as a child. I lived there till I was 7 years of age, so that kind of place has emotions which are photographic, a lot of them actually. and of lying in gorse and stuff and looking up at the sky. And I've revisited those areas as a photographer and try to evaluate them and try to photograph them as I perceived them in those days as a youngster, as a child. And while I understand the place and I can feel the place, it's been really difficult for me to photograph it and almost impossible to get the images that reflect the memories that I have in my head of the place.
I think I totally agree with that. I think I was brought up, well, first in Devon, just off the edge of Dartmoor, and then in Wiltshire, on the River Ebble. And I don't think I could go back and photograph there because you know that they say that you completely change every molecule in your body every 7 years. I'm not the person I was then. Yeah. I can draw on the things that have embedded in me to photograph the Dowrog and things once I've got to know the Dowrog. But no, I think it's nearly impossible. I think there's only one photographer that I know of that's done it, and that's Keith Carter. Mm-hmm. And he works in constructed medium format, or no large format, 5x4 images that are quite surreal and conjure up some sort of childish memories, and it's surreal and in some ways I think he's achieved it to the greatest degree I've ever seen. I don't think he's pulled it off properly. Yeah,
the only time I came close to it, and I did a little series where I did some pinhole stuff up on Garden Fawr, which overlooks Strumblehead.
Yeah.
And because the gaps and paths, as it happens, and gaps through stone walls and things, which I remember as a child and clambering over and hearing, because there's a sound that the rocks make there when they hit one another. It's a musical note. And
how do you do that visually?
Yes, I kind of got there because it was that sort of that memory, that sort of misty memory that pinhole can give you, of a sense of place and things. But you were talking earlier. I think we were off mic then, but about soundscapes, and you want to experiment with using sound and photography.
Yes, I mean I've never ever liked using text and photos. I've always thought of it as a bit like a writer who's written a novel feeling he has to put illustrations on every other page. But soundscapes are slightly different, and they can be evocative. And I did think for a while about the idea of using music, but the more I think about music, the music is nearly always aimed at making you feel a particular thing. And I don't want people to be forced to feel something. It's one of the main things about photography is that I say photographs can be like writing, but I don't believe they are like writing in the sense, that sounds stupid, doesn't it? Sorry. I believe that, you know how when a writer writes, he can come up with the basic ideas really strongly, so you know what he's telling you. There's a real strength in his dialogue and his plot and all these aspects. But then when he comes to describing somebody or something, he can describe somebody as having long hair, glasses and a beard, and he can put as much description into it as he wants. But every one of us will come up with a different face in our heads. Yeah. When we see the movie, we'll feel let down. Now, photography works in completely the reverse. I have control over how people see the world and see my world and the world that I'm in. But I've got no control, or very little control. I can only help guide people. I can nudge them in the direction of what I'm trying to say. And at the end of the day, they may get something completely different out of my books than I intended. But that doesn't matter, because it's like when I read a book, I will end up with a visual landscape or visual scape in my head that is completely different to what the author came up with. And that's accepted and fine. And in photography, it's reverse. And the trouble with music and photographs is that there's far too much trying to direct people. But with the soundscape, it's as if it's almost like the photograph. People will come up with their own impressions of the sounds they hear. They won't be led in the same way. So soundscapes do quite excite me. I do.
Are
like
they a
that.
part of this education of people, or the visual education of people?
Yes.
By adding a tiny that.
Yeah,
extra
helping
element,
people again. It's all back down to, we're not taught to read images.
Yeah.
We're all expected, for it to happen naturally, which it doesn't happen naturally. So finding ways to help people look at images in a body of work, it's finding ways to do that. So, earlier off mic I was saying, I'm more and more interested in the idea on top of the books. I always want to have an exhibition, but the idea of using plasma screens or something to help people so that I can control the way they look at the images.
It's really fascinating you should say that, you see, because I'm working on a project, or have a project in mind, and I've started the project, which is the Whitchurch Hospital in Cardiff is moving, and the whole place is going to shift. So I want to started documenting the building itself, and I want to document the people, and because it's going to disappear.
See, that's such a worthy, important, not worthy, it's the wrong word.
It's
important thing to do.
Yeah, but we're going to use soundscape as part of the exhibition because because it has to be immersive. Because
yes.
Otherwise, it becomes a nonsense. It's just pictures on a wall.
Yeah,
and pictures on a wall sometimes, as you say, don't hit the mark. Because
if you use text is so difficult to use with
Yeah.
images, unbelievably difficult.
Yeah.
I think there's only one, from my point of view, there's Bill Owens is the only person that's ever pulled it off.
Yeah.
American suburbia photographer who would photograph people, but he would then have quotes from the people. But they were amazing quotes. So he'd have people say, there was one photograph I loved, and it was a picture of a really old couple sitting in a tiny, tiny room on a couple of chairs, and on the wall there are shelves, endless shelves, going all the way around, and there are stones filling the shelves, and it looks a surreal image. And then the quote is, "We've been collecting rocks since our honeymoon." And it's just perfect. It doesn't describe the image. It's not trying to... No. It just adds to the image in a really strong way. Yeah. But so few people can do that. Yeah. Whereas I'm not good at that. So sound is more...
Right. So kind of... where does Chris Tancock go from here?
I don't go anywhere. I carry on the route I'm on. But then as you walk down a road, you may see a side turning. Or somebody might say, "Oh, look, it's a little bit more interesting over there." And I won't say, "Oh no, I'm on this road. I'll take it." That's why criticism is so good, isn't it? You're doing something and somebody says, "Well, that's bloody awful," and you suddenly go, "Oh my God, is it?" And then you start re-looking at it, and don't we all do it? Don't we all take an image we love, and we expect everybody else to love it? Why?
Yeah, that's very true. Actually, I've done that, and I've fallen into the trap, and I freely admit this. I've fallen into the trap. I put what I thought was an absolutely cracking picture up on Twitter, for example, and thought, "Whoa, the whole world is going to love this," and I will. Do you know what I mean? Self-delusional, I know, and maybe nobody will look at it, and nobody will comment on it, which is very deflationary, and perhaps a good thing, really, that one's ego is sometimes punctured when it comes to photography.
I think it's really important.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't mean you shouldn't take those photographs. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't carry on if you believe passionately. But you can learn from it, and you can say, okay, well, that one, as much as I love it, and the reasons I love it are really important, and they may be really important. But how can I make it more accessible? Yeah. And that's what it comes back to. It's, we said it earlier on, it's the why, the who are the two first things you need to do. And then it's the how. And the how is really important because it's the how you do it makes the first two things work. If you haven't got a how, especially if you use a how that's already been used a long time, when you bring the who and the why together, you can end up with something completely new. But if you haven't got a reason for doing it and you haven't got an audience in mind, it's impossible to do that. And you just end up taking pretty pictures, which will, be across the board and everybody will like. Fair enough, but if that's what you're happy with. But that's not the sort of photography I'm interested in. I'm saying all this, and I'm saying use lots of photographs. If you love taking individual images that are based on a simple template and have been taken, you go to Glencoe and you sand in that spot and you pray that somebody hasn't cut the tree down and you take your photograph and you love it, then go for it, But that's not all photography can be.
No.
It's not.
It's a huge palette, really, and the palette that you use and that you work with, I think is fascinating. I take my hat off to you, really, because I can see the love in it. Really, there's a love and a passion that is.
That's why I say, photograph what you're passionate about. I had a guy on a workshop once. Amazing guy, and I said to him, when I do a workshop, I always try to get out of people what they're passionate about, and I always feel sorry for the people that say landscape. Well, join the other 100,000, and this guy wouldn't tell me all the way through the workshop. He said, "Oh no, I can't tell you," and I was thinking, "Oh God, what's he into?" It's going to be terrible. And at the end, as it was all closing up and he was going away, he turned around and he said, "Well, Chris, what I'm passionate about is forklift trucks." And he said, "I just love photographing them." And he showed me some photographs on his iPhone, and they were extraordinary. He photographed them as if they were beautiful women. He had lighting. They were extraordinary. I thought, my God, this guy's made. I mean, how many people in the country are photographing forklift trucks like that? And as far as I know, he's doing really well. Because, he turned around and said, "Oh, there are lots of magazines on forklift trucks," which I didn't know about. So, it always should be forget photography. Completely and utterly forget it. What am I interested in? The other thing I get people when I say, "What are you interested in?" They turn around and say, "Photography." And I say, well, the best thing you can do is become a calligrapher then. It's a bit like, saying to a writer, "What am I interested in?" "Oh, my pens and my inks." And so best you can do is become a calligrapher. And there are so many photographic calligraphers out there, you won't believe it. But, you having a passion about something that's got no relation to photography at all, but it's something you love, something you know about, well, that's what you should be photographing. Not what you think is important. What you think other people will see as important.
Yes. A thing that really bugs me, because I'm a working photographer and I have to do PR stuff and I have to do this stuff and I have to do that stuff, and it really clouds your brain and it really gets in the way of doing what you really are interested in.
It's being able to
compartmentalize things.
Exactly. And I find I still do commercial work occasionally. I saw
some of the stuff you've done for SOC on the...
and nowadays I do work for Under the Thatch with Greg Stevenson. And the wonderful thing about that is I found something where the houses he does are gorgeous. So it's no problem when you get there. On the whole, they're just a dream to photograph. But in the past, I've been to places that, aren't a dream to photograph, and you're embarrassed to be there. And if you're working like that, and we've all gone through it, we've all had it, it can be terrible. And at the end of the day, you can feel terrible. But it is like any job. You've got to be able to, my biggest income now are my photographs, what I do, which, touch wood, thank God for. But it's still a fluctuating thing. You have good times, you have bad times. Photography is not an easy thing to make a living at anymore. No. There was a time when photography was a great thing to make a living at because there weren't very many of us, and it was difficult. But people just don't want to pay anymore because there are just enough people out there that'll do it for nothing because they want to be photographers. well, that's the way it is. So you have to find a way around that. You have to find other means of working.
If you were wrapping up your thoughts about photography, one sentence about your photography. The one sentence about your photography.
Oh God, that's a difficult one, because photography is so damn complicated. I think it would be, the photographic book. I mean, that's for me. Sometimes when you're out with the camera, it can be so difficult. I mean, you must all know it. It's just so hard. Yeah. But then when you're putting the stuff together in a book, I find that that's when I'm excited. I'm not always excited when I'm out taking photographs. It could be a pig. You're trying to photograph a cuckoo with a 70mm lens, and the damn thing is everywhere, but where you need him, or the Darrog is dried out, and you haven't got photographs of it flooding enough, and you really need to tell that, and it's just so frustrating. But when I've got the images and I'm working in the book, and this is a lot more than a sentence. Sorry, I just say it's difficult.
No. I understand completely. I mean, and I have a book in front of me here called Wild Wood, which is a wood below Pentre Ifan, which is the Cromlech up in the Preseli's, and a fascinating place. Makes me want to go there.
No, it is a wonderful place. And when I did this book, this is the last project I did on film. Well, not film. That sounds stupid, doesn't it? It's taken with a 5.4 Sinar camera, but I didn't want detail. The problem with woods is, God, there's detail, isn't there?
Yeah, everywhere.
And I know everybody goes out when it's misty and to try to help reduce the detail. I didn't want to do that. So what I did was I put multi-grade paper in the carrier. Right. So I'm photographing onto multi-grade paper. Now, the wonderful thing about multi-grade paper as a film is there's no detail. No. Very little detail. Yeah. But also the most wonderful thing is that because it's multi-grade, the effect lime green has on the film is you get this unbelievable softness.
Yes, it's ethereal.
It's ethereal, and it just gave me a feeling of the way I wanted to be when I was there. So that was the starting point. And then for ages, I still didn't know how to photograph it. I was going up there, I was taking photographs. There was so much information hitting me. I didn't know how to isolate things. It was a nightmare. And then the craziest thing happened. It must be, my son's 19, nearly 20 now, and he must have been 9 at the time. And I was reading him Wind in the Willows. Now, there's a bit in Wind in the Willows where Mole decides he's going to go off and be a big brave mole and go into the wildwood. But then he gets freaked out because he imagines all these imaginary creatures.
Yeah.
Well, the next day I went up and I'm walking through the woods and I walked straight up to a wolf. I could not believe it. And there was this wolf in the book. It's basically an old hedge or wall that's collapsed. But he had a head and ears and legs, and crazy enough, he had 2 eyes. So even when you'd walked around him, he carried on looking like a wolf.
Yeah.
Now, other people don't see wolves. I've had people come up and say they see a deer and they've seen lots of different things. But I saw a wolf, and I thought, wow, I wonder if there are other things like this up there. And it also really played into my excitement about the fact that we read images. Images don't exist outside your head. What exists outside your head is a piece of paper with ink on it. So you read those shapes and marks and tones on the paper, and we turn them into things in our head. But the power of a photograph for me is that we don't keep them in our head. We project them back onto the page and see them there. We don't see shapes, tones and colours on the page and an elephant in our head. We see the elephant. Yeah, it's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yes, and there's in Newport, there's a Cromlech in Newport, which I went to photograph, and there are bungalows and things all around it and stuff. But I started looking at the rock, and the lichen on the rock was fascinating. And I started using my camera and really up close, and all I was seeing were landscapes all over this rock. And it is,
brain-
it's Pembrokeshire encapsulated.
Wow. And the thing is, the brain is hot-wired to do that.
Yeah.
So what I decided to do is I thought, well, I'll just keep going up and looking for these things.
Yeah.
So virtually in every shot,
There are things.
there is a hidden creature.
Yeah.
And so it's a sort of anthropomorphic wood. But it gave me a reason to photograph it. I have to have a reason. I can't just say, well, that's nice, I'll photograph it. It's got to go beyond that. And the hidden creatures gave that a reason.
So I know you're photographing the Dowrog, and that's an enormously long project.
Yes, but the idea is it's going to be 3 books.
Right, okay.
So the 9 years will be divided into 3.
Right, okay.
So my first book, in theory, because it is always theory, should be soon ready. But I'm not, I hate being tied. That's the other thing with publishers and things. They will say, okay, you said 3 years, you've got to make it 3 years. Well, life's not like that. Especially photography's not like that. If I had to rush it, if I find that I haven't quite finished it, well, it'll get extended. I want to be organic with it. I've had far too many years working for magazines where, they always forgot the photographer and sent you out the last minute and expect you to come back with something amazing. So I don't need to do that anymore. So I will somehow finish the first book, and then there'll be another book, and it'll be divided into 3.
Do you concentrate on one? Do you have other projects on the go?
Oh yes, you have to. If you're working over 9
course.
years, you can't be working on one project.
No.
So I have a time out project, because photography is so damn difficult. If you're saying to yourself, this is what I want to achieve, life's a misery half the time. So I have a project where I don't do that. I have a project called Off the Beaten Track. And I just jump on my bike and I ride within my 5-mile radius of the house. And I just photograph events that happen to me. No stress, no thing. It's fun. And it's a lovely way to take photographs, and I recommend it. I mean, most people, I suppose, do that anyway, but it's not something I've ever done in the past. I've always had an agenda. So to do that, I'm finding it a real therapy. And I just love doing it. And as always, it'll be a book. And then my other project is the farm one, which is ongoing and it's a bit slow at the moment. And I have a new one in my head, which hasn't got any further than my head. But what I was saying, you've got to photograph what you know about. Well, my father was a gardener. His father was a gardener. All my uncles are gardeners. My mother's family were market gardeners and nursery owners and florists. And I think I was expected to be a gardener. But they never pushed me. But anyway, I suddenly thought, well, that's something I should be photographing. I got a garden out the back. I spent a big chunk of my time gardening. But I didn't know how to do it. And Pembrokeshire is not known for its big gardens.
No.
And I don't blame anybody. I struggle. The wind just takes away everything you plant.
Yeah.
So I thought, but then I suddenly realised as I was cycling around on my Off the Beaten Track project, I suddenly found 2 market gardens. And I thought, wow, maybe I should be photographing about market gardens. So I'm just approaching them at the moment, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do it. It'll probably take me a couple of years to work out how to do it. I'll probably look at a lot of work of other people that have done that sort of stuff, so I know what not to do. That's a good thing, by the way. The internet is wonderful for bringing up the subject you want to photograph, and every image you see is what you're not going to do.
Yes.
Not what you're going to do.
Yeah.
It's a really good resource for that. And then once you realise what you're not going to do, you can start looking and thinking, well, how now can I do it? And I'm at that stage with this project.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
That's okay. Enjoyed it.